The rain came down in sheets that cold November evening in Hartford, Connecticut, turning the cracked sidewalks into rivers of grey water that rushed toward the storm drains. Sarah Mitchell pressed her body against the rusted handrail outside the Valley View apartments, her left leg dragging slightly as she climbed each step with deliberate, painful effort. The grocery bag in her arms felt heavier than it should have, though she knew it contained barely enough to last 3 days. 4 cans of soup, a loaf of bread, some peanut butter, and a small jar of grape jelly that her daughter Emma had been asking about for weeks. At 34 years old, Sarah had learned that life rarely followed the plans you made for it. 5 years ago, she had been a dental hygienist with a promising career, a husband who loved her, and dreams of buying a little house with a white picket fence somewhere in the suburbs. Then came the car accident on Interstate 84, the one that took her husband Michael and left her with a shattered left hip, permanent nerve damage in her leg, and medical bills that would take 2 lifetimes to pay off. Now she lived on disability checks and the occasional freelance work she could find online, raising her 7-year-old daughter alone in a 2-bedroom apartment that smelled like mildew, no matter how many times she cleaned it. She reached the 3rd-floor landing and paused to catch her breath, her hand instinctively moving to massage the constant ache in her hip. Through the thin walls, she could hear the Gonzalez family arguing about something in Spanish, their voices rising and falling like waves. Down the hall, old Mrs. Patterson's television blared a game show, the excited announcer's voice competing with the steady drum of rain against the windows. Sarah fumbled with her keys, her fingers stiff from the cold. The apartment door swung open to reveal the familiar sight of their modest home. The second-hand couch with its faded floral pattern, the small dining table where Emma did her homework, the kitchen that was barely big enough for one person to stand in. But there was love here, in the crayon drawings taped to the refrigerator, in the stack of library books on the coffee table, in the way the lamplight fell soft and golden across the room. "Mama!" Emma came running from her bedroom, her dark hair bouncing in pigtails, her face lit up with that particular joy that children seem to have in endless supply. She threw her arms around Sarah's waist, nearly knocking the grocery bag from her mother's grip. "Careful, sweetheart," Sarah said, but she was smiling. She always smiled when she saw her daughter, no matter how hard the day had been, no matter how much her leg hurt or how empty her bank account was. Emma's smile made everything feel possible. "Did you get the jelly, the grape kind?" "I did. Peanut butter and jelly sandwiches for lunch tomorrow, just like I promised." Emma squealed with delight and helped her mother carry the grocery bag to the kitchen. As Sarah began putting things away, she noticed that the refrigerator was even emptier than she remembered. A half-empty carton of eggs, some leftover rice in a container, and a jug of milk that was probably on its last day of being drinkable. The pantry wasn't much better. She had stretched their food budget as far as it would go this month, but the check didn't come for another week, and there was no more stretching left to do. "Mrs. Rodriguez came by earlier," Emma said, hopping up onto one of the kitchen chairs. "She brought cookies, the ones with the chocolate chips. That was nice of her. She said her daughter is coming to visit for Thanksgiving. She's going to have a big turkey and everything." Sarah felt something tighten in her chest. Thanksgiving was in 2 weeks, and she had been trying not to think about it. Last year, they had managed a small chicken and some canned vegetables. This year, she wasn't sure they could manage even that. "We'll have our own special Thanksgiving," Sarah said, keeping her voice light. "Maybe we'll make those sweet potato muffins you like."
"With the marshmallows on top?"
"With the marshmallows on top." Emma seemed satisfied with this answer, and Sarah was grateful. Her daughter had learned to find joy in small things, in ways that sometimes broke Sarah's heart. A 7-year-old shouldn't have to learn that kind of contentment so early, but Emma had, and she did it with grace that put most adults to shame. That night, after Emma had been tucked into bed with a story about a princess who saved her kingdom by being kind to everyone she met, Sarah sat alone in the living room and did what she always did. She counted. She counted the bills spread out on the coffee table. Electric bill, overdue by 2 weeks. water bill, due in 3 days. Rent, always the largest and most terrifying number, due at the end of the month with no room for negotiation. The landlord, Mr. Hensley, had made it clear that he couldn't give her any more extensions. 30 years of renting to people who couldn't pay had hardened his heart against sob stories, he said. Sarah didn't blame him. Everyone was just trying to survive. She counted the money in her checking account, $147.33. Her disability check was due in 8 days. Until then, she had to make this money cover everything. Gas for the car, which she needed to get Emma to school, food, which they needed to stay alive, and something, anything, to put toward the electric bill so they wouldn't lose power. Sarah put her head in her hands and let herself cry, just for a moment, just long enough to release some of the pressure building behind her eyes. Then she wiped her face, straightened her shoulders, and began making a list. She was a survivor. That's what the accident had taught her. When everything falls apart, you don't have the luxury of giving up. You put one foot in front of the other, even when it hurts, especially when it hurts, and you keep moving forward. The next morning dawned grey and cold, with the promise of more rain in the heavy clouds that hung low over the city. Sarah got Emma ready for school, braiding her hair and packing her lunch with special care. A peanut butter and jelly sandwich, cut into triangles the way Emma liked. A small bag of pretzels, an apple that was a little bruised, but still perfectly good. Sarah wished she could do more, could pack the kind of lunches she saw other mothers posting about online, with cute shapes and colorful vegetables arranged like works of art. But Emma never complained. Emma understood, in that intuitive way children sometimes do, that her mother was doing her best. After dropping Emma at school, Sarah drove to the grocery store, not the nice one in West Hartford, where the organic produce gleamed under soft lights and the shopping carts had cup holders. The discount grocery store on the east side of town, where the produce was hit or miss and the shelves were sometimes sparse, but where $20 could actually feed a family for a few days if you were careful about it. She parked in the lot and sat for a moment, mentally calculating what she could afford. Bread, yes, the cheap kind in the plain packaging, eggs if they were on sale, maybe some pasta and a jar of sauce if she could find a good deal. She had clipped coupons from the Sunday paper, though there hadn't been many good ones this week. Sarah gathered her coupons and her determination and got out of the car. The walk from the parking lot to the store entrance wasn't long, but it felt like miles. Her leg was worse in the cold weather. The doctors said it might always be this way, that the nerve damage had created a permanent sensitivity to temperature changes. On days like this, every step sent electric shocks of pain shooting from her hip to her ankle. She grabbed a cart and began making her way through the aisles, her practiced eye scanning prices and calculating totals in her head. She had developed a system over the years. Always start with the necessities. Bread, eggs, milk if it's on sale. Then move to proteins. Beans, peanut butter, the occasional package of chicken if the discount sticker was big enough. Then vegetables and fruits, whatever was cheapest and closest to expiring, which usually meant it was marked down. Finally, if there was any money left, a small treat for Emma. A package of cookies, maybe, or one of those little fruit cups she loved. Sarah was in the canned goods aisle, debating between 2 brands of tomato sauce that differed by 11 cents when she heard it. A small sound, barely audible above the store's background music and the squeak of shopping cart wheels. A whimper, like a wounded animal. She looked around, confused. The aisle appeared empty, except for an elderly woman at the far end, squinting at nutrition labels through thick glasses. But then Sarah heard it again, and this time she located the source. There was someone sitting on the floor behind a display of canned beans, their knees drawn up to their chest, their body pressed against the shelving as if trying to disappear. Sarah approached slowly, her grocery cart rolling ahead of her. What she found made her heart clench. It was a woman, Probably in her 60s, though it was hard to tell. Her grey hair was tangled and unwashed, falling in matted strands around a face that was lined with exhaustion and something else. Hunger. Sarah recognized that look. She had seen it in her own mirror during the worst months after the accident, when she had sometimes skipped meals entirely so that Emma would have enough to eat. The woman was thin, too thin. Her clothes, a threadbare sweater and a pair of jeans that had been mended multiple times, hung on her frame like cloth on a scarecrow. Her hands, clutching her knees, were bony and trembling, and her eyes, when they met Sarah's, held a mixture of shame and despair that made something break loose inside Sarah's chest. "Are you okay?" Sarah asked softly, lowering herself as much as her bad leg would allow. "Can I help you?" The woman's lip trembled. For a moment she didn't speak, and Sarah thought she might not answer at all. Then, in a voice rough with disuse and emotion, she said, "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I just needed to rest for a minute. I'll leave. I didn't mean to cause any trouble." "You're not causing any trouble." Sarah looked around. No store employees in sight. "Good. When was the last time you ate?" The woman's eyes filled with tears. I can't remember. A few days, maybe. There was a church that was giving out meals, but they're closed now. Everything's closed." Sarah felt the weight of her own grocery list in her pocket, felt the careful calculations she had made, the precise budget she had constructed to get them through the next week. She thought about the electric bill and the rent, and the $147 that had to last until her check came. She thought about Emma, waiting at home, trusting that her mother would bring back food. And then she thought about this woman, this stranger, sitting on the floor of a grocery store because she was too weak from hunger to stand. "What's your name?" Sarah asked. Margaret Sullivan." "Margaret, I'm Sarah. I want you to come with me." Margaret's eyes widened with fear. I don't have any money. I can't buy anything. Please, I wasn't going to steal. I just needed to rest." "I know. I'm not going to turn you in. I want to help you." Sarah reached out her hand. After a long moment, Margaret took it. Her grip was weak, her skin papery and cold. Sarah helped her to her feet, supporting some of her weight, ignoring the scream of protest from her own damaged hip. "Do you like soup?" Sarah asked, guiding Margaret toward her cart. Margaret looked at her with an expression that was almost painful in its confusion. "What? Soup? I have some chicken noodle at home and bread. I can make you a meal. It's not much, but it's warm and it's something." Margaret began to cry in earnest then, silent tears streaming down her weathered cheeks. "Why?" she whispered. "Why would you help me? You don't know me." Sarah thought about all the people who had helped her after the accident. The nurses who had held her hand when she woke up and learned that her husband was gone. The physical therapist who had pushed her to walk again even when she wanted to give up. The social worker who had helped her navigate the disability system, Mrs. Rodriguez, who brought cookies and never asked for anything in return. She thought about all the kindness she had received, kindness she had never been able to repay, and she realized that maybe this was how it worked. Maybe you couldn't always pay back the people who helped you. Maybe sometimes you had to pay it forward instead. "Because someone has to," Sarah said simply. "Come on, let's get you warmed up." They walked to the checkout together, Sarah pushing the cart with Margaret shuffling beside her. Sarah made some quick mental adjustments to her shopping list. Instead of keeping the soup for herself and Emma, she would give it to Margaret. They could make do with pasta and rice for the next few days. It wasn't ideal, but they would survive. They always did. At the checkout, Sarah added a few things she hadn't planned on buying. A small package of cheese, some crackers, a banana that was just starting to brown. Margaret watched her with those swimming eyes, her mouth opening and closing as if she wanted to say something but couldn't find the words. The total came to $23.47, more than Sarah had planned to spend. But when she looked at Margaret, at this woman who had nothing, who had been sitting on the floor of a grocery store because she couldn't remember the last time she had eaten, Sarah knew she had made the right choice. She drove Margaret to her apartment building, ignoring the woman's protests that she couldn't impose. that she would be fine, that Sarah had already done too much. The truth was, Sarah wasn't sure where else Margaret would go. When she asked, Margaret admitted that she had been sleeping at a shelter across town, but the shelter was full tonight, and she didn't know where else to go. "You'll stay with us," Sarah said, and it wasn't a question. Margaret slept on the couch that night, wrapped in every spare blanket Sarah owned, her stomach full for the first time in days. Emma had taken to her immediately, showing her the drawings on the refrigerator and telling her about her favorite books, as if having a stranger in their home was the most normal thing in the world. Sarah watched them together and felt something warm bloom in her chest, something that felt almost like hope. The next week was harder than Sarah had anticipated. The food ran out faster with an extra mouth to feed, and she found herself making excuses to skip meals so that Emma and Margaret would have enough. Her leg hurt more than usual, a constant grinding pain that made it difficult to sleep. The electric bill went unpaid, and she received a final notice in the mail, printed on bright yellow paper that felt like a warning sign. But there were good moments too. Margaret, once she had regained some of her strength, turned out to be a remarkable cook. She could make a simple pot of rice taste like something from a five-star restaurant, adding spices and seasonings in combinations that Sarah never would have thought of. She told stories, too, stories about her life before everything fell apart. About her husband, who had died of cancer 3 years ago, leaving her with mountains of medical debt. About her son, who had moved across the country and stopped returning her calls. About the house she had lost, the job she had been too old to keep, the slow slide into poverty that had brought her to that grocery store floor. "I used to be somebody," Margaret said one evening, her hands wrapped around a cup of tea that Sarah had managed to stretch from a single tea bag used twice. "I taught high school English for 32 years. I had students who became doctors, lawyers, writers. One of them wrote a book that was on the bestseller list." She smiled, a sad, distant smile. "Now look at me. Can't even afford a can of soup." Sarah reached across the table and took Margaret's hand. "You're still somebody," she said. "The things that happen to you don't change who you are. They just changed your circumstances." Margaret squeezed Sarah's hand in return. "You're a good person, Sarah Mitchell. The world needs more people like you." On the 7th day of Margaret's stay, Sarah's disability check finally arrived. She stood in her kitchen with the envelope in her hands, doing the math she had done 100 times before. Rent, electric, water, food, gas for the car. The numbers never added up, no matter how many times she shuffled them. Something always had to give. This month, it was the rent that gave. Sarah put aside enough for the electric bill, knowing that losing power with winter coming would be catastrophic. She bought groceries, real groceries this time, with vegetables and chicken, and even a small cake from the bakery for Emma. She made sure Margaret had enough to eat, made sure her daughter had lunch money for school, made sure the car had enough gas to make it through the week. And then she called the landlord and asked for an extension on the rent. Mr. Hensley's voice on the other end of the line was tired and unyielding. "Sarah, I told you, I can't keep doing this. You're 3 months behind already. I've got bills to pay too." "I know, I'm sorry. I just need a little more time. I'm applying for more freelance work. I have some prospects. If you could just give me until the end of the month." There was a long silence. Sarah could hear the landlord breathing, could imagine him sitting in his office, surrounded by papers, surrounded by all the lives he held in his hands. "End of the month," he said finally. "But that's it, Sarah. After that, I'll have to start eviction proceedings. I'm sorry, but that's just how it is." Sarah thanked him and hung up. She stared at the phone in her hand for a long moment, feeling the familiar weight of despair pressing down on her shoulders. One more month to figure out how to come up with nearly $2,000 that she simply didn't have. She didn't tell Margaret about the phone call. She didn't tell Emma. She put on her brave face, the one she had perfected over years of struggling alone, and she kept moving forward, one foot in front of the other. That was the only way she knew how to survive. 2 days later, Margaret announced that she was leaving. "The shelter has a spot for me," she said, standing in the doorway with her threadbare sweater and her mended jeans, looking healthier than she had when Sarah first found her, but still fragile, still bearing the marks of hardship. "I can't keep imposing on you. You've already done so much." Sarah felt something catch in her throat. "You're not imposing. You're welcome to stay as long as you need." Margaret smiled, and there was something in that smile that Sarah couldn't quite read. "You're a remarkable woman, Sarah. Don't ever forget that. No matter how hard things get, no matter how impossible it seems, you remember that you are remarkable. The world has a way of rewarding people like you, even if it takes a little time." They hugged, and Margaret pressed a piece of paper into Sarah's hand. "This is my son's phone number," she said. "I want you to call him if you ever need anything. Tell him his mother sent you. Tell him that Sarah Mitchell saved my life." Sarah tried to protest, but Margaret was already walking away, her figure growing smaller and smaller until she turned the corner and disappeared from sight. Sarah looked down at the paper in her hand. A phone number with a California area code, and below it, a name, Robert Sullivan. She folded the paper and put it in her pocket, not expecting to ever use it. The days that followed were a blur of job applications and rejection emails, of counting coins and clipping coupons, of lying awake at night wondering how she was going to make it to the end of the month. Sarah applied for every work-from-home position she could find, wrote countless cover letters about her skills and experience, begged for freelance assignments from anyone who might have work to give. Most of the responses were the same. "Thank you for your application, but we've decided to go with another candidate. We appreciate your interest, but we're not hiring at this time. We'll keep your resume on file." Meanwhile, Emma's school sent home a notice about a field trip to the Science Museum. The cost was $15 per student, a sum that seemed impossibly large given their circumstances. Emma brought the permission slip to Sarah with hopeful eyes, and Sarah had to tell her that they couldn't afford it this month. She promised they would go to the museum another time, just the two of them, when things got better. But she saw the disappointment in her daughter's eyes, and it cut deeper than any physical pain her damaged leg could produce. Thanksgiving came and went. They didn't have a turkey or a big dinner or any of the things that other families seem to take for granted, but Sarah managed to scrape together enough for a small chicken, some mashed potatoes, and a can of cranberry sauce. She and Emma ate by candlelight because the electric bill had gone unpaid again, and Sarah had decided that the romantic ambience of candles was preferable to admitting that they might lose power any day. Emma didn't complain. She never complained. She ate her chicken and her potatoes and asked for seconds of the cranberry sauce, and she told her mother that it was the best Thanksgiving ever. Sarah held her daughter close that night and tried not to cry, because crying would mean admitting how bad things really were, and she couldn't afford to fall apart. Not now. Not when Emma needed her to be strong. The eviction notice came 3 days after Thanksgiving. It was delivered by a man in a suit who didn't make eye contact, who thrust the paper into Sarah's hands and walked away before she could say anything. She stood in the doorway of her apartment, the cold November air rushing in around her, and read the words that she had been dreading. She had 30 days to vacate the premises, 30 days to pack up their lives and find somewhere else to go. Sarah closed the door and leaned against it, letting the paper fall to the floor. She had known this was coming. She had prepared for it as much as anyone could prepare for such a thing. But the reality of it, the finality of seeing it in writing, hit her with a force that left her breathless. Where would they go? She had no family in the area. Her parents had passed away years ago, and her only sibling, a brother she hadn't spoken to in over a decade, lived somewhere in Texas and had made it clear he wanted nothing to do with her. The shelters in Hartford were overcrowded, with waiting lists that stretched for months. She could maybe stay with friends, but her friends had their own problems, their own families, their own limited space. She couldn't ask anyone to take in a woman and her child, possibly for months, until she got back on her feet. If she ever got back on her feet, That was the thought she tried not to think, the fear she kept buried deep inside where it couldn't hurt her. What if she never recovered? What if this was just her life now, an endless cycle of struggling and failing, of climbing out of one hole only to fall into another? What if she couldn't give Emma the life she deserved? Sarah picked up the eviction notice and walked to the kitchen table. She sat down and stared at it for a long time, tracing the legal language with her eyes, feeling the weight of each word. Then she reached into her pocket and pulled out the piece of paper that Margaret had given her. Robert Sullivan, a California phone number, a son who didn't return his mother's calls. Sarah didn't know what made her dial the number. Desperation, maybe, or some strange hope that she couldn't quite explain. She expected to get voicemail, expected to hang up before the beep and never try again. Instead, a voice answered on the third ring. "Hello?" It was a man's voice, deep and slightly impatient, the voice of someone who was used to being busy, to having important things to do. "Hi, is this Robert Sullivan?" "Yes, who is this?" Sarah took a deep breath. "My name is Sarah Mitchell. I'm calling about your mother." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. When Robert spoke again, his voice had changed, become guarded and cautious. "What about my mother?" "I met her about 2 weeks ago. She was in a bad way. I found her at a grocery store. She hadn't eaten in days." Another pause. Sarah could hear breathing on the other end, could sense the complicated emotions flowing through the silence. "Is she okay?" Robert finally asked. "Is she alive?" "She's alive. I don't know if she's okay. She stayed with me for about a week, and then she went to a shelter. She gave me your number before she left. She wanted me to tell you that I helped her. She wanted me to have a way to reach you, in case I ever needed anything." "I see." Robert's voice was unreadable. "And do you need anything, I mean?" Sarah looked around her apartment, at the eviction notice on the table, at Emma's drawings on the refrigerator, innocent and hopeful despite everything, at the life she was about to lose. "No," she said, surprising herself. "I don't need anything from you. I just wanted you to know about your mother. I thought you should know what she's going through." "What she's going through is her own fault," Robert said, and there was bitterness in his voice now, years of accumulated resentment bubbling to the surface. "Do you know why I stopped calling her? Because every time we talked, it was about money, about how she needed help, how things were bad, how I needed to send more. I have my own family, my own responsibilities. I couldn't keep—" He trailed off. Sarah waited. "I'm sorry," Robert said eventually. "I shouldn't be telling you this. You don't know our history." "No, I don't. But I know that your mother loves you. She talked about you, about how proud she is of you. She has pictures of you in her wallet from when you were a kid." "She does?" "She showed them to my daughter. She told Emma stories about you, about the adventures you used to have, the games you used to play. She misses you, Robert. Whatever happened between you, she misses you." The silence stretched on. Sarah could hear traffic in the background on Robert's end, could hear the sounds of a life far removed from her own. "You said you found her at a grocery store," Robert said. "What were you doing there? Why did you help her?" Sarah thought about how to answer. "I was grocery shopping. I heard someone crying, and I went to see if they were okay. Your mother was sitting on the floor, behind a display of canned beans. She was scared and hungry and alone. I couldn't just walk away. Most people would have? Maybe. But I'm not most people, and nobody should have to go through that alone." Robert was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You're right, I should call my mother. I should have called her months ago. Thank you, Sarah, for helping her, for calling me." "You don't need to thank me." "Yes, I do, and I want you to know that if you ever need anything at all, you can call this number. I mean it." Sarah smiled, though she knew he couldn't see it. "I appreciate that, but I'll be okay. I'm a survivor." They said goodbye, and Sarah hung up the phone. She sat at the kitchen table for a long time after, thinking about the conversation, thinking about Margaret and her estranged son, thinking about all the complicated ways that families could hurt each other and heal each other. She didn't expect to hear from Robert Sullivan again. But 2 days later her phone rang. "Is this Sarah Mitchell?" It wasn't Robert's voice. It was a woman, professional and polished. with an accent that suggested money and education. "Yes, this is Sarah. My name is Catherine Chen. I'm calling on behalf of Robert Sullivan. He'd like to meet with you if you're available." Sarah frowned. "Meet with me? Why?" "He didn't give me details, but he was very insistent. He's flying into Hartford tomorrow afternoon. He asked if you would be willing to have dinner with him." Sarah didn't know what to say. This was unexpected, strange, perhaps even a little alarming. "Can you tell me what this is about?" "I'm sorry, I honestly don't know. Robert just said it was important and that I should stress that you have nothing to worry about. He wants to thank you personally for what you did for his mother." Sarah thought about Emma, about the eviction notice, about the 100 different ways her life was falling apart. She thought about saying no, about protecting herself from whatever this strange situation might bring. But she also thought about Margaret's smile, about the piece of paper she had pressed into Sarah's hand, about the way the world sometimes worked in ways you couldn't predict. "Okay," Sarah said, "I'll meet him." The restaurant Robert chose was nicer than any place Sarah had been in years. It was in West Hartford, in one of those upscale shopping districts where the storefronts were adorned with tasteful holiday decorations and the cars in the parking lot cost more than her annual income. She had agonized over what to wear, finally settling on a simple dress she had bought for job interviews, paired with the only nice coat she owned. Robert was already there when she arrived, seated at a corner table with a view of the street. He stood when he saw her, and Sarah was struck by how much he looked like his mother. The same grey eyes, the same shape to the jaw, the same quiet intensity in his expression. "Sarah, thank you for coming." They shook hands, and Sarah sat down across from him. A waiter appeared immediately to offer her water, wine, whatever she wanted. She asked for water and tried not to feel overwhelmed by the elegance of her surroundings. "I know this is strange," Robert said, reading her expression. "I appreciate you agreeing to meet me. Your assistant said you wanted to thank me. You really didn't have to do all this." "Actually, I did." Robert leaned forward, his hands clasped on the table. "I've been thinking about our conversation ever since we talked, about what you said about my mother, about who you are and what you did." Sarah shifted uncomfortably. "It wasn't anything special. Anyone would have done the same thing." "No, they wouldn't." Robert's voice was firm. "I know that because I run a company that studies consumer behavior. I have data on how people act when they encounter strangers in need. Most people don't stop. Most people don't help. They're too busy, too scared, too convinced that it's someone else's problem. What you did, taking in a complete stranger, feeding her, giving her a place to stay when you clearly had very little yourself, that's not normal behavior. That's exceptional behavior." Sarah felt her cheeks warm. "I had a little, enough to share." "But you didn't have enough for yourself, did you?" Robert's gaze was penetrating. "I did some research after we talked. I hope you'll forgive me. But I wanted to understand who I was dealing with. I know about your accident. I know about your husband. I know that you've been struggling to make ends meet ever since, raising your daughter alone on disability income while dealing with chronic pain that would have broken most people." Sarah's throat tightened. She didn't like being researched, didn't like having her struggles laid out on a table in a fancy restaurant like specimens under a microscope. But there was no judgment in Robert's voice, only a kind of wonder. "You had every reason in the world to walk past my mother that day," Robert continued. "Every reason to protect what little you had, to focus on your own survival and your daughter's. Instead, you stopped. You helped. You gave your own food away to a stranger when you barely had enough to feed your own family. Do you know how rare that is?" Sarah didn't answer. She was thinking about Emma's face when she had brought Margaret home, about the way her daughter had immediately started showing their guest around the apartment, proud of their modest home despite its shabby furniture and thin walls. She was thinking about Margaret's tears when Sarah had handed her a bowl of soup, about the way she had said thank you over and over again, as if she couldn't quite believe that someone would show her kindness. "I called my mother after we talked," Robert said. For the first time in almost a year, we spoke for 3 hours. She told me things I didn't know, things about what really happened after my father died, about the medical bills and the debt, and the way she tried to protect me from it all. I had it wrong, Sarah. I thought she was just asking for handouts, but she was drowning, and I was too wrapped up in my own life to see it. He paused, his eyes glistening slightly. I'm flying her out here next week. We're going to figure things out together, get her into stable housing, get her the help she needs. It should have happened years ago, but it's happening now, because of you. Because you answered my call and told me the truth about what was happening to her. Sarah felt tears prickling at her own eyes. I'm glad. I'm really glad you're reconnecting with her. She deserves that. She does. And you deserve something too. Robert reached into his jacket and pulled out an envelope, sliding it across the table toward her. I want to give you this. Sarah looked at the envelope. It was thick, substantial, made of expensive paper. What is it? Open it. Her hands were shaking slightly as she picked up the envelope and broke the seal. Inside was a check. She looked at the number written on it, and for a moment she forgot how to breathe. $50,000. I can't accept this, she said immediately, trying to push the envelope back across the table. This is too much. I didn't help your mother for money. I know you didn't. Robert refused to take the envelope back. That's exactly why I want to give it to you, because you weren't looking for a reward, because you did something good when no one was watching, when there was nothing in it for you. That kind of goodness should be recognized. But this is... Sarah stared at the check again. $50,000, more money than she had seen in one place in her entire life. Enough to pay off the back rent, catch up on the electric bill, put money away for Emma's future. Enough to give them a real Thanksgiving next year, a real Christmas, a real life. Please, Robert said, let me do this. It's nothing to me, but I can see that it could change everything for you. Consider it a thank you from me and my mother. Consider it the universe finally giving you the break you deserve. Sarah's hands were still shaking. She thought about her pride, about all the times she had refused help because accepting it felt like admitting defeat. She thought about Emma, about the field trips she had missed, the lunches she had packed with whatever was cheapest, the worried look in her eyes when she asked if they were going to be okay. She thought about Margaret sitting on the floor of that grocery store, too proud and too tired to ask for help until she was literally unable to stand. "Thank you," Sarah whispered. "I don't know what to say. Thank you." Robert smiled, and suddenly he looked less like a powerful businessman and more like someone's son, grateful and relieved and human. "You don't have to say anything. Just keep being who you are. The world needs more people like you, Sarah." They had dinner together, and Robert told her about his life, his work, his family. He ran a technology company in Silicon Valley, something to do with data analytics and artificial intelligence. He had 2 children of his own, teenagers now, and a wife who volunteered at their local food bank every weekend. He talked about his mother, about the good memories from his childhood that he had let himself forget during the years of estrangement. He asked about Emma, about Sarah's dreams for her future, about the life she hoped to build once she got back on her feet. By the time they parted ways that evening, Sarah felt like she had made a friend. Robert promised to stay in touch, promised to let her know when Margaret arrived in Hartford, promised that this wasn't the end of their connection, but only the beginning. Sarah drove home in a daze, the check tucked safely in her purse. She couldn't quite believe it was real. She kept waiting for the catch, the twist, the moment when everything would fall apart again. But the check was still there when she checked, still made out to her name, still promising a future that she had stopped allowing herself to imagine. Emma was asleep when Sarah got home, tucked into her small bed, with her favorite stuffed animal clutched in her arms. Sarah stood in the doorway of her daughter's room and watched her breathe, in and out, peaceful and trusting, unaware of how close they had come to losing everything. Tomorrow she would go to the bank. She would deposit the check and pay off the back rent. She would call the electric company and settle the bill. She would stock the pantry with food, Real food, the kind she used to buy before the accident changed everything. She would sign Emma up for the next field trip, and she would say yes instead of no, possibility instead of impossibility. But tonight, she just wanted to stand here and feel grateful. Grateful for Margaret, for Robert, for the strange chain of events that had led her to this moment. Grateful for the reminder that kindness mattered, that helping others mattered, even when you had almost nothing to give, especially when you had almost nothing to give. She had been so focused on survival for so long that she had forgotten what it felt like to hope, to believe that things could actually get better. But standing here now, watching her daughter sleep, Sarah allowed herself to believe. Maybe the universe did reward goodness. Maybe not always, maybe not predictably, but sometimes when you needed it most. Maybe all those small acts of kindness, all those moments when you chose compassion over self-interest, added up to something larger than yourself. A ripple effect spreading outward, touching lives you would never know about. Sarah smiled and closed Emma's door softly. Tomorrow would be a new day. And for the first time in years, she was actually looking forward to it. The weeks that followed felt like a dream. Sarah paid off the back rent and the overdue bills, erasing months of accumulated anxiety with a few signatures on a few checks. She enrolled Emma in an after-school art program that the girl had been eyeing for months, watching her daughter's face light up with pure joy when she realized she would finally get to take classes. She bought groceries without counting every penny, filled the pantry with things they hadn't had in years, made meals that included vegetables and proteins and even dessert. She also started seeing a specialist about her leg. The chronic pain she had lived with for 5 years turned out to be partially treatable with a combination of physical therapy and medication that her insurance had never covered. Robert had given her the name of a doctor, had even offered to pay for the treatment, but Sarah declined. The check he had given her was more than enough. She wanted to do the rest herself. The physical therapy was hard. Twice a week, she drove to a clinic on the other side of the city and worked with a therapist named Marcus, who pushed her further than she thought she could go. Some sessions left her in tears, her legs screaming with pain, her body exhausted from the effort. But slowly, gradually, things began to improve. The constant ache subsided to an occasional throb. She could walk farther without limping, climb stairs without stopping to rest. For the first time since the accident, she allowed herself to imagine a future where pain wasn't the first thing she felt every morning. Margaret came to Hartford in mid-December, brought by Robert on a private jet that landed at the small regional airport just outside the city. Sarah was there to meet them, standing in the terminal with Emma beside her, both of them bundled up against the cold. When Margaret saw them, she burst into tears. "Sarah," she said, pulling her into a fierce embrace. "Oh, Sarah, look at you. You look wonderful." "So do you," Sarah said. And it was true. Margaret had gained weight, her face fuller and healthier, her eyes brighter than they had been in the grocery store. She was wearing a new coat, a warm one, and her hair had been cut and styled. She looked like a different person. "My son is taking care of me now," Margaret said, smiling through her tears. "We're working things out. It's not perfect, but we're trying, and it's all because of you." Emma tugged at Sarah's sleeve. "Is this the soup lady?" she asked, using the name she had given Margaret during her stay with them. Margaret laughed and knelt down to Emma's level. "That's me, the soup lady. Your mama's soup saved my life, you know. Mama said that soup can't really save lives, only love can. Your mama is very wise." Margaret hugged Emma tightly. "You're lucky to have her." Robert stood back, watching the reunion with a quiet smile. When Sarah caught his eye, he nodded, a simple acknowledgement of everything that had passed between them. They had spoken several times on the phone since that dinner, building a friendship that Sarah hadn't expected but had come to value. Robert was a good man who had made mistakes, who had let distance and resentment blind him to his mother's suffering. But he was trying to make things right now, and that was what mattered. "I have something for you," Robert said, stepping forward. "Consider it an early Christmas present." He handed Sarah an envelope. She opened it expecting another check, preparing to argue that he had already given her too much. But inside was not a check. It was a letter, printed on official letterhead from a company she didn't recognize. "What is this?" "Read it." Sarah scanned the letter, her eyes widening as the words registered. It was a job offer. A real job, with a real salary, from Robert's company. They wanted to hire her as a remote customer service manager, a position that would allow her to work from home, set her own hours, make enough money to not just survive, but actually build a life. "I can't," she started, but Robert held up his hand. "Before you say no, let me explain. This isn't charity. I talked to my HR team about what happened, about who you are and what you did. They looked at your background, your experience before the accident. You're qualified for this job, Sarah. More than qualified. The fact that you know the value of treating people with kindness makes you exactly the kind of person we want, representing our company." Sarah stared at the letter. A job, a real job. Not freelance work that came and went, not scrambling for whatever she could find. Stability, security, a future. "I don't know what to say." "Say yes," Margaret said, her eyes shining. "Take it, you deserve this." Emma looked up at her mother with those big, trusting eyes. "Does this mean we're going to be okay, Mama?" Sarah felt the tears coming, but for once they weren't tears of frustration or despair. They were tears of relief, of gratitude, of joy so overwhelming that her body didn't know any other way to express it. "Yes, baby," she said, pulling Emma close. "We're going to be okay." Christmas that year was like nothing Sarah had experienced since before the accident. They had a tree, a real tree, decorated with ornaments that Emma had made in her art class. They had presents wrapped in shiny paper, not a lot, but enough to make Emma squeal with delight on Christmas morning. They had a turkey dinner with all the trimmings, and Margaret and Robert came to share it with them, filling the small apartment with laughter and conversation and warmth. Sarah sat at the head of the table, watching the people she loved gathered around her, and felt a peace that she had almost forgotten was possible. So much had changed in just a few weeks. So much that had seemed impossible was now real. She thought about that day in the grocery store, the moment when she had heard Margaret crying and had to decide whether to keep walking or to stop. It would have been so easy to keep walking. She had her own problems, her own struggles, her own life to worry about. She could have told herself that it wasn't her responsibility, that someone else would help, that she couldn't afford to give away what little she had. But she hadn't kept walking. She had stopped. She had helped. And that single choice, that one moment of compassion, had set in motion a chain of events that changed everything. Was it luck, providence, the universe rewarding goodness, as Robert had suggested? Sarah didn't know. What she knew was that kindness mattered, that the small choices you made, the quiet decisions to help rather than harm, to give rather than take, had consequences you couldn't always predict. That being good to others wasn't just about them. It was about who you wanted to be, the kind of person you wanted to see when you looked in the mirror. "Mama, are you okay?" Emma was looking at her with concern, a forkful of mashed potatoes suspended halfway to her mouth. Sarah smiled. "I'm more than okay, sweetheart. I'm happy." The winter months passed, and spring began to show itself in the parks and sidewalks of Hartford. Trees budded, flowers pushed through the soil, and Sarah's life continued to transform in ways she couldn't have imagined a year ago. Her job with Robert's company turned out to be perfect for her. Working from home meant she could schedule her hours around Emma's school day, be there when her daughter got off the bus, help with homework, and make dinner without the exhausting commute that most jobs required. Her manager was understanding about her physical limitations, allowing her to take breaks when her leg bothered her, never pushing her to do more than she could handle. The paycheck was steady and sufficient. For the first time in 5 years, Sarah had a savings account with actual money in it. Not a lot, but enough to create a cushion, a buffer against the unexpected disasters that had always threatened to destroy her fragile stability. She could buy groceries without checking her bank balance first. She could pay bills before they became overdue. She could say yes to Emma's requests, not always, but more often than before. Physical therapy continued, and her leg continued to improve. Some days were better than others. Some days the old pain came roaring back, and she had to remember how to breathe through it, how to let it wash over her without drowning. But the good days grew more frequent, and the bad days grew less severe. Marcus, her therapist, told her that she might never be completely pain-free, but she could expect to reach a level of functionality that would have seemed impossible when they started. Margaret moved into an apartment across town, a small but comfortable place that Robert helped her afford. She and Sarah talked on the phone several times a week, and they saw each other regularly for coffee or lunch, or just to sit in the park and watch the world go by. Their friendship had deepened into something precious, a bond forged in crisis and strengthened by gratitude and mutual respect. "I was so close to giving up that day," Margaret told her once, as they sat on a bench in Elizabeth Park, watching Emma chase pigeons across the grass. "Before you found me, I mean. I had been thinking about what I would do if no one helped me. If I couldn't find food, if the shelters stayed full, I was thinking about endings." Sarah reached over and took her hand. "I'm glad I found you." "So am I." Margaret squeezed her fingers. "You saved my life, Sarah. I know people say that and don't mean it literally, but I do. You literally saved my life." "You saved mine too," Sarah said. "You showed me that things could get better, that help could come from unexpected places, that the world wasn't as cold and cruel as I had started to believe." They sat together in comfortable silence, watching Emma's joy as she scattered the birds, listening to her laughter as they flew away and then returned, playing the game over and over. "I want to do something," Margaret said eventually. "Something to pay it forward, like you did. I've been thinking about volunteering at the shelter where I stayed. They need people to help serve meals, to talk to the residents, to show them that someone cares. I know what it's like to be in that position. I know how much a kind word can mean when you have nothing else." Sarah smiled. "I think that's a wonderful idea. Will you come with me? Not every time, but sometimes. I think it would be good for them to see someone like you, someone who made it through." "I'd like that." And so began another chapter. Sarah and Margaret volunteering together at the shelter, serving meals and listening to stories, offering hope to people who had lost their own. Emma came sometimes, helping to hand out food, playing with the children who lived there temporarily, bringing her special brand of sunshine into dark places. It wasn't always easy. Some days, Sarah saw faces that reminded her of how close she had come to being in their position. She saw mothers with children, elderly women with nowhere to go, people whose lives had fallen apart through no fault of their own. She saw herself in their eyes, and it was humbling and terrifying and deeply motivating all at once. But she also saw the impact of small kindnesses, a warm meal on a cold night, a smile from a stranger, a conversation that treated them like human beings rather than problems to be solved. She saw people leave the shelter and rebuild their lives, find jobs and apartments and hope. Not everyone, not always, but enough to prove that change was possible. One evening in late spring, Sarah was helping to clean up after dinner service when a young woman approached her. She couldn't have been more than 25, with tired eyes and a baby balanced on her hip. "Excuse me," the woman said. "Are you Sarah? Margaret said I should talk to you." "I am. What can I help you with?" The woman hesitated, shifting her baby to the other hip. "I don't know how to ask this. I've never been good at asking for help, but Margaret said you might understand." Sarah led her to a quiet corner where they could talk. The woman's name was Alicia, and her story was painfully familiar. A bad relationship she had finally escaped. No family to turn to, a job that didn't pay enough to cover rent and childcare. She had been at the shelter for 3 weeks, trying to figure out her next move, but she was running out of options. "I'm not asking for money," Alicia said quickly. "I just need advice, I guess. Margaret said you went through something similar, that you figured it out." Sarah thought about her own journey, about all the times she had felt hopeless, about all the people who had helped her along the way. She thought about the nurses and social workers, about Mrs. Rodriguez with her cookies, about Margaret and Robert and the check that had changed her life. "I didn't figure it out alone," she said. "Nobody does. The secret isn't being strong enough to do everything by yourself. The secret is being brave enough to accept help when it's offered." They talked for a long time. Sarah shared what she knew about resources, programs, and opportunities that might help. She gave Alicia her phone number and told her to call any time. She held the baby while Alicia cried, letting out all the fear and frustration that she had been holding inside. Before she left that night, Sarah stopped by the shelter's bulletin board and pinned up a note with her contact information. "If you need someone to talk to," it said, "call me. I've been where you are. I know it feels impossible, but it's not. I promise." Over the following months, she got several calls. Some were one-time conversations, a chance for someone to vent to a stranger who understood. Some developed into ongoing relationships, mentorship of a sort, Sarah sharing what she had learned about navigating poverty and disability and single motherhood. She couldn't help everyone, couldn't solve every problem, but she could listen. She could care. She could remind people that they weren't alone. Summer arrived hot and humid in the way that Hartford summers always were. Emma finished first grade at the top of her class, proudly showing Sarah her report card with its row of excellent marks. They celebrated with ice cream sundaes at the park, Emma chattering about everything she wanted to do during summer break, while Sarah listened and smiled and counted her blessings. Robert came to visit in July, bringing his whole family this time. His wife Eleanor turned out to be warm and genuine, with an easy laugh that put Sarah at ease. Their teenage children, twins named Marcus and Lily, were polite and curious, asking Emma about her school and her art and her favorite things to do. They spent a weekend together, exploring Hartford, eating at local restaurants, building connections that felt surprisingly natural. "I want you to know something," Robert said on his last day in town, as they walked along the riverfront while the kids ran ahead. "You changed my life, Sarah. Not just by helping my mother, but by reminding me what's important. I had gotten so caught up in work, in success, in all the things I thought mattered, that I forgot about the things that actually do." "Like what?" "Like family, like kindness, like being there for the people who need you." He shook his head. "I was so focused on building a company that I almost lost my mother. I almost lost myself. You woke me up." Sarah thought about how strange life was, how a single moment could ripple outward in ways you never expected. She had helped a stranger in a grocery store, and now here she was, walking along a river with a man who had become one of her closest friends, watching their children play together, feeling like maybe, just maybe, everything was going to be okay. "We woke each other up," she said. Fall came again, and with it, the anniversary of the day Sarah had found Margaret in the grocery store. She hadn't planned to mark the occasion, but Margaret insisted on celebrating, so they gathered at Sarah's apartment for dinner. Emma, now 8 years old, and growing faster than Sarah could believe, helped set the table. Robert and Elena flew in from California. Even Alicia came, bringing her baby, now walking and getting into everything, living in an apartment of her own after Sarah had helped her navigate the system. Looking around the table, Sarah felt her heart swell with emotions she couldn't quite name. These people, this community, hadn't existed a year ago. She had been alone, struggling, convinced that the world was cold and help was impossible. And now, here she was, surrounded by people who cared about her, who she cared about in return, connected by threads of kindness that had woven them all together. "I'd like to make a toast," Margaret said, raising her glass, "to Sarah Mitchell, the woman who saved my life by giving me a bowl of soup." Everyone raised their glasses. Sarah felt her cheeks flush with embarrassment. "It wasn't just the soup," Margaret continued. "It was the way she looked at me, like I was still a person, even though I felt like I had stopped being one, like I still mattered, even though I had stopped believing it. That's what saved me. Not the food, not the money, not any of the things that came after. It was being seen, being cared about, being reminded that I wasn't alone in the world. She turned to Sarah, her eyes bright with tears. You have a gift, Sarah, the gift of seeing people, of caring about them, of doing the right thing, even when it's hard, even when it costs you something. Never lose that gift. The world needs it. We need it. Sarah didn't know what to say. She wasn't good at accepting praise, wasn't comfortable being the center of attention. But she looked around the table at the faces of the people she loved, and she realized that Margaret was right. Not about her being special, but about seeing people, about caring, about doing what was right. That was something anyone could do. It didn't require money or power or special abilities. It just required the decision, made over and over again, to choose compassion over indifference, to stop when you heard someone crying, to help when you had the chance, to pay forward the kindness you had received, creating ripples that spread outward in ways you would never fully see. Thank you, Sarah said finally, her voice thick with emotion, for this, for all of you, for everything that's happened this year. I spent so long thinking I was alone, thinking I had to figure everything out by myself. But I wasn't alone. None of us are. We just have to be willing to reach out, to ask for help, to accept it when it's offered. And we have to be willing to give help too, even when we're not sure we can afford to. She raised her own glass, to kindness, to community, to paying it forward. They drank together, and the conversation flowed on, warm and easy and full of hope. Outside, the fall leaves drifted down from the trees, covering the ground in shades of red and gold. Inside, the apartment was filled with laughter and stories, and the kind of love that grows when people take care of each other. After everyone had gone home and Emma was asleep, Sarah sat alone in the living room and thought about everything that had happened. The accident that had taken so much from her. The years of struggling to survive. The moment in the grocery store when she had chosen to help instead of walk away. She thought about Margaret, who had gone from sleeping on floors to having a home and a son who called her every day. She thought about Robert, who had reconnected with his family and rediscovered what mattered. She thought about Alicia and her baby, about the people at the shelter, about all the small ways that her choice to help had rippled outward. And she thought about herself, about who she had been before that day and who she was now. She was still Sarah Mitchell, single mother, disabled, living paycheck to paycheck in many ways. But she was also something more. She was part of a community. She was connected to people who cared about her. She was doing work that mattered, both her job and her volunteer efforts. She was healing. Not just her leg, though that was part of it. Her heart was healing too. All the grief she had carried since the accident, all the fear and anger and despair, was slowly releasing its grip. She still had bad days. She still struggled sometimes, but she wasn't alone anymore. She knew now that she didn't have to be. Sarah got up and walked to the window, looking out at the quiet street below. The night was clear, stars visible above the glow of the streetlights. Somewhere out there, someone was struggling the way she had struggled. Somewhere, someone was sitting on a floor, too weak and too hopeless to stand, waiting for a stranger to stop and care. Maybe she couldn't help everyone, but she could help someone, and that someone might help someone else. And those ripples of kindness spreading outward from a single moment of compassion might eventually cover the world. She smiled, feeling something settle inside her. Peace, maybe, or hope, or just the simple satisfaction of knowing that she was living the life she wanted to live, being the person she wanted to be. Tomorrow, she would get up and do it all again. Work and physical therapy and taking care of Emma, volunteering at the shelter, talking to people who needed to be heard, living her life, not the life she had planned, but the life she had built from the ruins of her plans. And she would keep stopping, keep helping, keep paying it forward. Because that was who she was now. That was who she had always been, really, even when the world had tried to convince her otherwise. Sarah Mitchell, survivor helper, ordinary woman, making extraordinary choices, one small act of kindness at a time. And that, she realized, was enough, more than enough. It was everything. Winter came again, bringing with it another holiday season and the completion of a full year since Sarah's life had changed. The anniversary fell on a Saturday, and she woke to find Emma already up, making breakfast in the kitchen with the kind of concentrated effort that only children can bring to scrambled eggs. "Mama, I made breakfast," Emma announced proudly, presenting a plate that was slightly overloaded with eggs that were slightly burned. "Happy anniversary!" Sarah laughed and hugged her daughter, not caring about the mess or the burned edges. "Thank you, sweetheart. This looks wonderful." They ate together at the small kitchen table, Emma chattering about the snow that was predicted for later that day, about the holiday concert at school where she had a solo, about everything and nothing in the way that 8-year-olds do. Sarah listened and nodded and felt her heart overflow with gratitude for this child, this gift, this reason to keep going no matter what. Later that morning, Sarah bundled up and went out for a walk. Her leg was better now, good enough to walk several blocks without much pain, good enough to enjoy the cold air and the quiet streets. The neighborhood looked different in winter, stripped down to its essentials, but there was beauty in the bare branches against the grey sky, in the way the light fell soft and silver through the clouds. She found herself walking toward the grocery store, not on purpose exactly, but her feet seemed to know where they wanted to go. When she arrived, she stood outside for a moment, looking at the building where everything had changed. It looked the same as it always had, ordinary, unremarkable, just another discount grocery store in a struggling neighborhood, serving people who were doing their best to survive. No one walking past would ever guess that something important had happened here. No one would know that a single act of kindness occurring inside these walls had set off a chain reaction that changed multiple lives. Sarah went inside. The store was quiet, only a few shoppers wandering the aisles, lost in their own thoughts and their own struggles. She walked slowly, not really shopping, just remembering. The canned goods aisle, the display of beans where she had found Margaret crying, the checkout line where she had paid for groceries she could barely afford. She was standing in that aisle, lost in memory when she heard it, a sound that made her heart skip, a small, muffled sob coming from somewhere nearby. Sarah turned, scanning the aisle. At first, she saw nothing. Then her eyes landed on a figure huddled on the floor near the end of the aisle, partially hidden behind a display of soup cans. A young man, maybe early 20s, with his knees drawn up to his chest and his face buried in his arms. For a moment, Sarah felt the weight of the past year pressing down on her. She thought about all the help she had given and received, all the connections she had made, all the ways her life had changed. She thought about how tired she was sometimes, how much she still had to deal with in her own life, how easy it would be to just keep walking and let someone else handle this. Then she thought about Margaret, about the way she had looked, sitting on that floor, too desperate to be embarrassed, about what would have happened if Sarah had kept walking that day, if she had decided it wasn't her problem, if she had chosen the easy path instead of the right one. She didn't keep walking. "Hey," Sarah said softly, approaching the young man with careful steps. "Are you okay?" He looked up, startled, and she saw the same things she had seen in Margaret's face a year ago: fear, shame, exhaustion, the look of someone who had been pushed past their breaking point and didn't know how to get back. "I'm sorry," he said, scrambling to get up. "I wasn't doing anything. I just needed to sit down for a minute. I'll leave." "You don't have to leave." Sarah lowered herself to the floor beside him, ignoring the twinge in her leg, positioning herself at his level. "My name is Sarah. What's yours?" He stared at her, clearly confused by this turn of events. "James, why are you sitting down here?" "Because standing hurts my leg, and I wanted to talk to you." Sarah smiled. "When was the last time you ate?" James's face crumpled. For a long moment he didn't answer, and Sarah could see him fighting to hold himself together. Then, in a voice that cracked with emotion, he said, "I don't know. A couple of days, maybe. I've been trying to find work, but no one's hiring, and my unemployment ran out and I—" He shook his head. "I'm sorry. You don't need to hear this. It's not your problem." "Maybe not," Sarah said, "but I want to help if you'll let me." "Why, you don't know me." Sarah thought about how to answer. She could tell him about Margaret, about Robert, about the way one act of kindness had transformed her life. She could explain the philosophy of paying it forward, of creating ripples that spread outward into the world. But somehow that felt too complicated, too much like trying to justify something that didn't need justification. Instead, she just said, "Because someone has to, because I've been where you are, because I know how much it means when a stranger stops to care." James started to cry then, silent tears streaming down his face. Sarah sat with him, not saying anything, just being present, letting him know that he wasn't alone. After a while, she stood up and offered him her hand. "Come on," she said, "let's get you something to eat." She bought him groceries. Not a lot, but enough to last a few days. She gave him her phone number and the name of a shelter that she knew still had space. She told him about resources and programs, the same ones she had used, the same ones that had helped her survive. And she told him something else, something that Margaret had told her, something that had stuck with her ever since. "You're still somebody," she said as they stood outside the store saying goodbye. "The things that happened to you don't change who you are. They just changed your circumstances. And circumstances can change again. They will change again. You just have to keep going." James nodded, clutching the grocery bag like a lifeline. "Thank you," he said. "I don't know how to thank you enough." "You don't have to thank me. Just, when you get back on your feet, help someone else. That's how it works. That's how we all make it through." She watched him walk away, disappearing down the street with his groceries and his hope. She didn't know what would happen to him, whether he would find his way or fall back into despair. She couldn't control that. All she could do was offer help when she had the chance and trust that it would make a difference. Sarah walked home through the first snowflakes of the predicted storm, feeling the cold air on her face and the familiar ache in her leg. She thought about James, about Margaret, about all the people she had helped and all the people who had helped her. She thought about the strange, beautiful, unpredictable way that life worked, how suffering could lead to compassion, and compassion could lead to connection, and connection could lead to healing. She thought about Emma, waiting for her at home, probably making hot chocolate and pressing her face against the window to watch the snow fall. She thought about the life they had built together, the community they had joined, the future that was finally starting to look bright. And she thought about that moment 1 year ago when she had heard someone crying and had to decide whether to stop or keep walking. She had stopped. She would always stop. That was who she was. When she got home, Emma was indeed at the window, watching the snow accumulate on the sidewalks and car roofs. She turned when she heard the door open, her face lighting up with that familiar joy. "Mama, you were gone a long time. Where did you go?" Sarah hung up her coat and went to join her daughter at the window. The snow was falling faster now, big flakes that drifted down like feathers, covering the world in white. "I went for a walk," she said, "and I met someone who needed help." "Did you help them?" "I did." Emma nodded, as if this was the most natural thing in the world, because to her it was. She had grown up watching her mother help others, had learned by example that kindness was not optional, but essential, that helping was just what you did when you had the chance. "Can we make hot chocolate?" Emma asked. "The kind with marshmallows." "The kind with marshmallows," Sarah agreed. They went to the kitchen together, mother and daughter, and made hot chocolate while the snow fell outside. They talked about nothing important, school and friends and the holiday concert coming up. Normal things, everyday things, the small moments that made up a life. Later, after Emma had gone to bed, Sarah sat alone by the window and watched the snow continue to fall. She thought about everything she had been through, everything she had lost, everything she had gained. She thought about the accident and the grief and the years of struggle. She thought about Margaret and Robert and James and all the others she had helped along the way. And she thought about kindness, about how fragile it was and how powerful, about how a single moment of compassion could change everything, could set off ripples that spread outward in ways you could never predict, about how the choice to help, made over and over again, could transform not just other lives, but your own. She wasn't special. She knew that. She was just an ordinary woman who had been through hard times and come out the other side. But she had learned something valuable in the process. She had learned that kindness mattered, that community mattered, that stopping to help, even when it was hard, even when you had nothing to give, was the most important choice you could make. The snow continued to fall, covering the city in white, making everything look clean and new. Tomorrow it would melt, and the world would go back to being its usual messy, complicated self. But tonight, everything was quiet and beautiful and full of possibility. Sarah smiled and finished her hot chocolate. Then she went to check on Emma one more time, adjusting the blankets, brushing the hair from her sleeping face, feeling that fierce, protective love that had kept her going through everything. Tomorrow she would get up and do it all again, work and therapy and taking care of her daughter, volunteering at the shelter, helping whoever crossed her path and needed help, living her life, not the one she had planned, but the one she had built, one small act of kindness at a time. And it would be enough, more than enough. It would be everything. As she stood in Emma's doorway, watching her daughter sleep, Sarah whispered a quiet thank you to Margaret, for teaching her about paying it forward, to Robert, for showing her that help could come from unexpected places, to James, for reminding her why she did what she did, to everyone who had ever stopped to help her, everyone who had ever shown her kindness, everyone who had ever reminded her that she wasn't alone, and to herself for stopping that day in the grocery store, for making the choice that changed everything, for being the kind of person who heard someone crying and decided to care. That was her story, not the story of a private jet or a windfall of money, though those things had happened too. But the real story, the one that mattered, was simpler and more profound. It was the story of a woman who helped a stranger and found her own life transformed in the process. It was the story of kindness rippling outward, touching lives in ways that could never be fully measured. It was the story of hope, even in the darkest places, even when everything seemed lost. And it was still being written, one day at a time, one choice at a time, one act of kindness at a time. Sarah closed Emma's door softly and went to bed. Outside, the snow continued to fall, blanketing the world in white. And somewhere in the city, James was eating his first real meal in days, feeling the warmth spread through his body, feeling something that might have been hope beginning to stir in his chest. The ripples were spreading, and they would keep spreading outward and outward long after this night was over, long after everyone involved had forgotten how they started, long after Sarah Mitchell's story had become just one thread in a tapestry of kindness that covered the world. That was the power of stopping to help. That was the power of saying yes instead of no, of compassion instead of indifference, of seeing another person's pain and deciding to care. That was the power of love, in all its simple, ordinary, extraordinary forms. And it started with a woman and a stranger and a grocery store floor. It started with a choice. It started with the words, "Can I help you?" And it never ever stopped. 6 months after that snowy night, Sarah received an unexpected call. It was James, the young man from the grocery store, his voice full of an emotion she could hear even through the phone's small speaker. "Sarah, I don't know if you remember me from the grocery store about 6 months ago. You bought me groceries and gave me the name of a shelter." "Of course I remember you, James. How are you doing?" "I'm good. I'm actually really good." His voice cracked slightly. "I got a job. A real job, with benefits and everything. I'm renting a room in a house with 3 other guys. It's not much, but it's mine. I'm eating 3 meals a day and saving money and planning for the future. Sarah felt tears spring to her eyes. James, that's wonderful. I'm so happy for you. I called to thank you. I know you said I didn't have to, but I needed to. That day in the grocery store, I was ready to give up. I had been thinking about it for a while. About just walking into traffic or jumping off a bridge or something. I know that sounds dramatic, but that's where I was. And then you sat down next to me on that floor, and you talked to me like I was a person, and you helped me, and it changed everything. James, I'm not done. He took a breath. I also called to tell you that I helped someone. Last week I was walking to work and I saw this kid, maybe 16, 17, sitting on a bench crying. He had a backpack next to him like he had run away from home or something, and I stopped. I sat down next to him and asked if he was okay, and I helped him. Got him some food, called a youth shelter that could take him in, made sure he wasn't alone. Sarah was crying now, silent tears streaming down her face. That's beautiful, James. It's because of you. You told me to help someone else when I got back on my feet, so I did, and I'm going to keep doing it every chance I get. They talked for a while longer, James telling her about his job and his plans and his hopes for the future. Sarah listened and celebrated and felt her heart overflow with something that was bigger than happiness, something closer to fulfillment. After she hung up, she sat for a long time thinking about ripples, about the way a single act of kindness could spread outward, touching lives that the original helper would never even know about. Margaret had helped her. She had helped James. James had helped a runaway teenager. And who knew how many people that teenager would help someday, how far the ripples would ultimately spread. It was humbling. It was inspiring. It was everything she had ever hoped for when she made that first choice to stop and care. Emma came home from school that afternoon, bubbling with excitement. Her art teacher had selected one of her drawings for a district-wide competition, and she had a chance to win a scholarship to a summer art program. "Will you help me practice?" Emma asked, her eyes shining. "The competition is in 2 weeks, and I want to make something really special." "Of course I will," Sarah said. "What do you want to draw?" Emma thought for a moment. Then she said, "I want to draw people helping each other, like you help people at the shelter, like Margaret helped us, like that story you told me about the man in the grocery store." Sarah felt her breath catch. "You remember that story?" "I remember all your stories, Mama. They're my favorite, because they're real, and they're about being kind, and they make me want to be kind too." They spent the rest of the afternoon working on Emma's drawing. Sarah watched her daughter sketch figures reaching out to each other, hands extended, faces full of compassion. It wasn't technically perfect. It was still the work of an 8-year-old, but there was something in it that made Sarah's heart ache with pride. Because this was the legacy she was building, not money or property or any of the things the world typically measured success by, but this. A daughter who understood that kindness mattered. A community of people who had been helped and would help others in turn. Ripples spreading outward, touching lives that Sarah would never know about, creating change that would outlast her own small existence. Emma won the competition. Her drawing of people helping each other was selected as the best in the entire district, and she was awarded a full scholarship to the summer art program. The local newspaper wrote a small article about it, including a quote from Emma about why she had chosen her subject. "My mom taught me that helping people is the most important thing you can do," Emma said. "She helps people all the time, even when it's hard. She says that's how you make the world better, one person at a time." Sarah cut out the article and kept it on the refrigerator, right next to Emma's other drawings. She looked at it every morning while she made coffee, reminding herself of why she did what she did, not for recognition or reward, but for this, the chance to show her daughter what mattered, the chance to model a life worth living. Summer came, and Emma went off to her art program, returning each day full of stories about the projects she was working on and the friends she was making. Sarah continued her work, her volunteering, her life. She still had hard days. She still struggled sometimes. The disability payments weren't always enough, and her leg still hurt when the weather changed, and there were moments when the weight of everything felt like too much to bear. But she wasn't alone anymore. She had Margaret, who called every week to check in. She had Robert and Eleanor, who had become like family. She had the people at the shelter, both the staff and the residents, who had become her community. She had James, who sent occasional updates about his life and his ongoing efforts to pay it forward. And she had Emma, always Emma. The reason she kept going, the reason she kept believing, the reason she woke up every morning determined to make the world a little bit better. On the 1-year anniversary of James's phone call, Sarah organized a special event at the shelter. A celebration of kindness, she called it, inviting everyone who had been helped and everyone who had helped others. There was food and music and stories, so many stories, about the ways that small acts of compassion had changed lives. Margaret spoke about her time on the streets and how Sarah had saved her. James spoke about his darkest moment and how a stranger had given him hope. Alicia spoke about raising her daughter alone and how the community at the shelter had become her family. And others spoke too. People Sarah barely knew, sharing stories that traced back through chains of kindness to moments she had initiated and moments she had nothing to do with. When it was Sarah's turn to speak, she stood before the gathered crowd and felt overwhelmed by emotion. All these people, all these lives, all this connection and community and love, growing from seeds that had been planted in moments of compassion. "I don't have a speech prepared," she admitted. "I'm not good at this kind of thing, but I want to say something that I've learned over the past couple of years, something that I believe with all my heart." She paused, looking out at the faces before her. Familiar faces and new ones, people she had helped and people she would help someday, all of them part of this beautiful, messy, interconnected web of humanity. "Kindness is not a weakness," she said. "It's not naive or foolish or a waste of time. It's the strongest thing we have. It's the thing that holds us together when everything else falls apart. It's the thing that makes life worth living, not just for the people we help, but for ourselves." She thought about all the times she had been told to focus on herself, to protect what she had, to let other people solve their own problems. She thought about how easy it would have been to listen to that advice, to close herself off from the world and its pain. "I used to think I couldn't afford to help others," she continued. "I was struggling too much myself. I had nothing to give, but I was wrong. I had something to give, even when I had almost nothing. I had compassion, I had presence, I had the willingness to stop and care, to see another person's pain and decide to do something about it." She smiled, feeling the tears on her cheeks but not minding them. "And here's the secret I discovered. When you give those things away, they don't diminish. They grow. Every act of kindness makes you more capable of kindness. Every moment of compassion opens your heart a little wider. Every time you help someone else, you become more of who you're meant to be." She looked at Emma, sitting in the front row, her face shining with pride. "So I want to challenge everyone here today. Don't wait until you have enough to give. Give now. Give whatever you can. A kind word, a listening ear, a meal for someone who's hungry, a moment of your time for someone who feels alone. You don't have to solve everyone's problems. You don't have to save the world. You just have to stop when you see someone hurting and let them know they're not alone. That's it. That's the whole secret." She took a deep breath. That's how we change things, not through grand gestures or heroic actions, through small, simple, everyday choices to care for each other, through ripples that spread outward from single moments of kindness, through love in all its ordinary, extraordinary forms. The room was quiet. Then someone started to clap, then someone else. Soon the entire room was applauding, not just for Sarah, but for each other, for the community they had built, for the choice they made every day to care. Sarah stepped down from the podium and was immediately engulfed by Emma, who threw her arms around her mother's waist and hugged her tight. "That was beautiful, Mama," Emma said. "I'm so proud of you." I'm proud of you too, baby girl. I'm proud of us. They stood there together, mother and daughter, surrounded by friends and community and love. Outside, the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Inside, people were laughing and talking and connecting, building the relationships that would sustain them through whatever challenges lay ahead. This was what mattered, Sarah thought. Not the money or the job or any of the material things that had come her way, but this, the connections, the community, the love, the knowledge that you weren't alone, that you had people who cared about you, that you were part of something larger than yourself. She had built this, not alone, never alone, but with her own 2 hands and her own open heart. She had stopped when she could have kept walking. She had helped when she could have turned away. She had chosen compassion over and over again, and this was the result. A community of people who helped each other, a daughter who understood what mattered, a life that felt meaningful and full despite all its challenges. And ripples, spreading outward, touching lives she would never know about, creating change that would outlast her. That was her legacy. That was her gift to the world. And it started, all of it, with a simple choice to stop and ask, "Can I help you?" Sarah Mitchell closed her eyes and felt the warmth of her daughter's embrace. She felt the presence of her community around her. She felt the peace that comes from knowing you've lived your life well, that you've made choices you're proud of, that you've loved and been loved in return. And she knew with absolute certainty that it had all been worth it. Every struggle, every sacrifice, every moment of doubt. It had brought her here, to this place, to these people, to this life. It had brought her home. The evening wound down slowly, people lingering to talk and connect, reluctant to leave the warm glow of community. Sarah moved through the room, hugging friends, thanking volunteers, making sure everyone had what they needed. She was tired but fulfilled, her heart overflowing with gratitude. As the last guests departed, she stood in the doorway and watched them go. The sun had fully set now, stars beginning to appear in the darkening sky. Emma stood beside her, leaning against her side, fighting sleep. "Time to go home," Sarah said softly. "Can we walk?" Emma asked. "I like walking at night." "We can walk." They made their way through the quiet streets, mother and daughter, hands clasped, steps matching. The night was warm and gentle, carrying the scent of summer flowers from the yards they passed. Streetlights cast pools of golden light on the sidewalks, guiding them home. "Mama," Emma said. "Yes, sweetheart." "Do you think I'll help people when I grow up, like you do?" Sarah smiled. "I think you already help people, baby girl. You help me every single day. But I mean like really help, like what you did for Margaret, like what you do at the shelter. If that's what you want to do, then yes, I have no doubt you'll be amazing at it." Emma was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I think I want to be an artist, but also someone who helps. Can I be both?" "You can be anything you want to be. And some of the best help we can give people is through art, through beauty, through showing them that the world isn't all darkness, that there's light and color and hope too." Emma nodded, considering this. "I could make art for the shelter, paintings for the walls, to make it feel less sad. That would be wonderful. And I could teach the kids there how to draw, like my teacher taught me. That would be wonderful too. And someday, when I'm big, I could have my own shelter, where people can come and be safe and look at beautiful art and learn to make their own." Sarah felt tears prick her eyes again. This child, this incredible, compassionate, imaginative child, who saw problems and immediately started dreaming up solutions, who looked at the world's darkness and instinctively searched for ways to bring light. "I think that's a perfect dream," Sarah said, "and I know you can make it come true." They walked the rest of the way in comfortable silence, the kind that exists between people who understand each other completely. When they reached their apartment building, Sarah paused at the entrance and looked up at the stars. "Thank you," she whispered, not to anyone in particular, to the universe maybe, to whatever forces had brought her to this point through all the pain and struggle and growth, to everyone who had helped her along the way, to her own self for making the choices that had led here. "Thank you for what, Mama?" Emma asked. "For everything, baby girl, for absolutely everything." They went inside, climbing the stairs that Sarah had once struggled to manage, that she could now navigate with only a hint of pain. They entered their apartment, their home, modest but filled with love. Emma went straight to her room to get ready for bed, and Sarah stood in the living room for a moment, taking it all in. The drawings on the refrigerator, more numerous now, showing Emma's growing skill, the comfortable furniture, not fancy, but well-loved, the photographs on the shelves, documenting the life they had built together. Margaret and Robert at last year's Christmas dinner, Emma's art competition victory, the shelter celebration from today. This was her life, not the one she had planned, but the one she had been given, and she wouldn't trade it for anything. Sarah went to tuck Emma into bed, sitting on the edge of the mattress and brushing the hair from her daughter's face. Emma looked up at her with those bright, trusting eyes, already fighting sleep. "Tell me a story, Mama." "What kind of story?" "A real one about helping people." Sarah thought for a moment, then she began. "Once upon a time, there was a woman who thought she had nothing left to give. She was tired and hurt and scared, and she didn't know how she was going to make it through another day. But then she heard someone crying, and she decided to stop. She decided to help, and that one choice changed everything." "What happened to her?" "She found out that she had more to give than she knew. She found out that helping others helped her too. She found out that kindness is the strongest thing in the world, and that even when you have almost nothing, you still have love, and love is always enough." Emma smiled sleepily. "That's a good story." "It's a true story." "Is it about you?" "It's about all of us, baby girl. Everyone who's ever stopped to help, everyone who's ever chosen kindness, everyone who's ever believed that one person can make a difference." Emma's eyes were closing now. "I love you, Mama." "I love you too, sweetheart, more than anything in the world." Sarah leaned down and kissed her daughter's forehead. Then she quietly left the room, leaving the door slightly ajar the way Emma liked it. She went to the window and looked out at the night sky, at the stars that had been there for billions of years and would be there for billions more. Such a vast universe, and here she was, one tiny person in one small apartment in one ordinary city, trying to make a difference. But she was making a difference. She knew that now, not a huge, world-changing difference, but a real one. One person at a time, one choice at a time, one act of kindness at a time. That was enough. That was more than enough. That was everything. Sarah smiled and went to bed, falling asleep with peace in her heart and hope for tomorrow. The work would continue. The ripples would keep spreading. The love would keep growing. And she would be there at the center of it all, doing what she had always done. Stopping when she heard someone crying. Helping when she had the chance. Choosing kindness over and over again. Because that's who she was. Because that's who we all can be. Because that's how we change the world. One small act of compassion. One simple choice to care. One person helping another person, creating ripples that spread outward forever. That was the story. And it was only just beginning. The end. Ah, not the end. Never the end. Because stories of kindness don't end. They keep going, passed from one person to another, one generation to the next, rippling outward in ways we can never fully see. So this isn't an ending, it's an invitation. An invitation to stop when you see someone hurting, to help when you have the chance, to choose compassion, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. An invitation to be part of the story. Because the story needs you, the world needs you, and somewhere out there right now, someone is waiting for you to stop and ask, "Can I help you? Will you stop?" The answer matters more than you know. It matters more than anything. Choose wisely. Choose kindness. And watch the ripples spread.